Alright, welcome to the guide on how scrap spawns. Scrap is generated at the start of the load of the moon, so the second you pull that lever, it generates the random seed, boom, your scrap is spawned in. So you have two categories. You have your loot spawning rooms and your non-loot spawning rooms. To put it simple, your rooms that don't generate scrap will be these hallways, these brick hallways, main, and the back rooms looking room that everybody thought was Bracken room at one point. Let me see if I can find it here. This room right here. This is also not a loot spawning room. Now, what this means is that it will not force generate scrap, but as I will explain very soon, there can be instances where scrap will spawn in the brick rooms or in this back rooms room or in main, as I'm sure a lot of you have seen scrap in main. And I will explain that in a moment. So your loot tiles are going to include the locker room here. This big fork tile room, I call it belt room. Belt room. Any kind of catwalk or grading tile like this. So either this one or the staircase. This tile here. Or the jump tiles too. They can have loot spawn on them or around them. This apparatus room tile doesn't need to have apparatus. It can just be this tile without apparatus can spawn loot. The server room tile. And any of these rooms that have the white floor can spawn loot. Now what these loot spawning rooms mean is that scrap will generate in these rooms in a sort of circle radius. So you can imagine a big circle around this locker room, and anything in that radius can have a chance to spawn scrap. So this is why you can sometimes see main having scrap by like right the main entrance in these corners, is because this grading tile is a loot room. So scrap can spawn in a radius of a circle, and main can actually be in that circle radius, which is why you see loot in the main area. If you take a look at these brick room tiles, you can see that there are no loot tiles around it, meaning there's like there is zero chance that scrap will spawn in like this area, in these areas and these areas. But let's take this brick room for example, right? Here you could probably have a piece of loot because of this grading tile, but also because of this server room tile. This server room tile could technically spawn something in this room, even though it's not connected. But because it's in its circle radius, it can spawn loot. Now here's a perfect example of what I mean by the loot circle. So main does not spawn any loot, but you can see this perfume here. That's because it is in this loot tile radius of the stairwell. Now, in addition to the loot rooms, inside the loot rooms you have specific places loot spawns. This doesn't mean all loot will spawn in these specific places, it just means that there are spawns where loot can specifically spawn. First example is shelves. The actual name for this one is the exact spawn. So your scrap that spawns on shelves is an exact spawn. Another example is the pallets here. These are also a spawn. In locker rooms, you have small item spawns, which will be in the corner here where the locker spawns. Once again, this does not mean that all the loot will spawn in there in locker room. You can also find loot like in the corners here, or even sometimes on top of this little gray thing. Here's an image showcasing that circle radius I'm talking about. You can see that loot spawns in this general circle area. And because of that, you can see it spawning loot in brick rooms. Now, when it comes to mansion tiles, you really cannot expect any sort of cohesion when it comes to loot spawning. You can't predict what's spawning where. Pretty much every tile in mansion is a loot spawning tile. Like, you're gonna find loot everywhere. You can notice that, like, kitchen often has a lot of loot sometimes, so focus kitchens when you find them. Another good one is the TV room. I don't believe I have one here, but oh, here it is. The TV room can sometimes also have some good loot. It definitely doesn't have as much as kitchen. It might be a little bit of confirmation bias, but I feel like I find loot every time I'm in here, even though it definitely doesn't spawn as much loot as in a kitchen. And then just a rule of thumb, it's always good to check tables. Sometimes you'll find like 4 item spawns on tables, and it's kind of crazy. But as for mansion, that's about how it goes. I mean, you can't predict where loot will and won't spawn. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I'll see you tomorrow.